Happy to meet you all. Happy to be here. Some of you may have joined the previous sketch session where I was also here as a sort of host or participant, depending on how you look at it, walking through some of the latest features of Sketch. And I'm back again with some additional updates on things that both we've launched recently and things that are coming soon, things that are in the pipeline that are pretty imminent. So I'm excited to share those things with you as well. Let me start by sharing my screen. And now you should all be able to see my screen where we've got our little title slide here. This should look familiar. If you're here, you already know this information. This is our little gem session. It is the 30th of November, and it's all different times because you're in all different time zones. But for me, it is 8 a.m., and I'm excited to start my day here with y'all. I am Joseph Angelo Todaro. I often include my middle name for SEO purposes. There's another Joseph Todaro, and I try not to get confused with him. He's a leader of the mafia in Buffalo, New York. So I try to differentiate myself using my middle name. I'm the head of video here at Sketch. So you may be familiar with my largest video project since joining Sketch, which is Sketch 101. It's a full course to get you started with Sketch. And if you haven't checked that out, I do highly recommend it, especially if you're just getting started with Sketch. But I'm sure we have an audience here that's kind of scattered all over the spectrum in terms of familiarity with Sketch and tenure with using Sketch. So I'm going to launch our first poll here. I would love to hear from you all how long you've been using Sketch. Get a sense of experience in the audience here. So I just launched this poll. Go ahead and vote. It looks like, it's looking like the majority of you have been using Sketch for quite a long time. We've got some folks who are new, but since we're going to be going over relatively new features this morning, it'll probably be news to just about everyone, even if you are experienced with the tool. So this is great. It's awesome to see 44% of you have been using Sketch for more than 5 years. That's me as well. I'm a long time Sketch user, so new features get me all kinds of excited. And I'm going to end this poll so we can get into those. Cool. So I'm going to start us off just by going over the agenda. I also want to mention that Sketch 102 is on the way. So since some of you are pretty experienced with Sketch, Sketch 101, I do recommend Sketch 101 for even for folks who are used to Sketch from years ago, simply because the product landscape, the product architecture has changed so much with the inclusion of workspaces, with the new mobile app, the new web app. A lot has changed with Sketch, and Sketch 101 will get you sort of reoriented or reacquainted with Sketch, not just as a Mac app, but as a more holistic suite of products that form one cohesive platform. Sketch 102 again is on the way, and that's when we're going to get into some of the more advanced features of Sketch. So whether you just finished Sketch 101 or if you want to brush up on some of what's new regarding prototyping or the use of symbols, color variables, styles, etc., Sketch 102 is going to get into that stuff. So if you head to Sketch 101, you'll find this in the footer where you can enter your email address to get put on that waiting list where we'll ping you as soon as we have something to share. All right, so the agenda for today, hello and welcome. That is where we are right now. And next, we're going to move on to what's new in Sketch, what's relatively new in Sketch. I've got one more poll question coming at you here in a moment, because we did go over some of this stuff in the previous session, but I don't want to make any assumptions and, assume that everyone was here for that previous session. So some of this stuff is going to be semi-new, but I do want to cover at least one thing that we covered last time, just because it's kind of a big deal and it sets the stage for exciting stuff in the future. And after we go over what's new, what has been incorporated in the product. We'll talk about what's next, what's coming soon to the product. And at the end, we'll save some time for some Q&A, because I want to hear from you all what you want to talk about, and we'll talk about that stuff. So we'll start with what's new in Sketch. And for this, I'm going to revisit a couple of items from the previous session, but I want to talk about something that's new, and there's more coming. There's more in the works right behind this. So I'm on the Sketch web app right now, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the Sketch web app, it's essentially a web-based application that gives you access to all the documents that are in your workspace, and it allows you to view your documents or share documents with others to be viewed in their full fidelity. You now get a full canvas view. So I'm going to open up this budget app where I can see the actual canvas. And this isn't just some pixel-based preview. If I zoom in, you can see we actually have the engine built into this web app where the design is completely vector, and we're rendering it on the fly. So this is really exciting stuff. I will say before you start going down the train of thought of editing features, our web app, the purpose of our web app is to view, to consume, to comment, to sort of collaborate around an existing document as a source of truth, a shared source of truth. Our Mac app is going to remain the editing experience. We believe in building native apps, and what we're able to do with native apps is still really incredible. And in the design space, we're dealing with an audience that is predominantly consisting of Mac users. So we're continuing what we've started on the Mac app, but the web app is allowing us to bring in other collaborators. It's allowing us to bring in our stakeholders, internal or external, and it's allowing us to, facilitate a developer handoff with users who aren't designers, who aren't on Macs, who are on a PC. I mean, you can open this web app in any browser on any platform, Mac or PC. So we'll get into developer handoff here in a moment. But another thing I want to point out that we've shipped that's been a long time coming, we've reworked the commenting experience. In the past, the comment sidebar would summarize the comments in a document, and it would show you the comments that are on the artboard that you're currently looking at. And you'd have to dive into an artboard in order to even add a comment to that artboard. And the comment would be added to the artboard itself in general, right? So you'd still have to sort of be verbose about your feedback in describing the part of the screen that you're commenting on, right? There wouldn't be a point on the screen that the comment is pinned to or anchored to, so to speak. So we've reworked this experience. This has been a very, very popular request. Now, when you add a comment, you stick it to a point on the canvas, and we call these annotations. So I can now click on the thing that I want to comment on and add a little annotation here, which gives me the same old comment box. I can still do the same things I could do before. We support emoji, markdown, tagging folks, but I could say, something as short as, let's make these darker. And I don't have to explain what I'm talking about. And if you're anything like me, if you're lazy and visual, this makes a really, really huge difference in how quickly and in how much ambiguity you can remove from your feedback simply by being able to click on the thing that it is that you're talking about. Really does make a huge difference. And you can move these around. So, if I were to leave this over here where there's just this sliver of darkness, that might not be the best place to say, let's make this darker. I could slap it on this larger dark area where the bar is not active. And I can add as many annotations as I want. And you may have noticed I didn't have to go into the artboard details, which is really nice. I can remain in the canvas view, and I can add these annotations, not just to artboards, but now to any place on the canvas, which is really nice. Because sometimes you have design elements that don't belong to an artboard. And previously there wasn't a way to comment on those. So that's another major improvement to commenting. The sidebar remains, and the sidebar is now an awesome way of navigating comments within a document. So if over here I added another comment, there's this little icon on the toolbar, as well as the shortcut N for new comment. And I could say, let's darken the gradient for increased readability. Typing live, not my favorite thing to do. There we go. So now that I have a couple of comments, I can use the sidebar to jump from comment to comment. So I don't have to keep an eye out for these little dots necessarily. And you can also hide those dots from the little overflow menu here. You can hide comments, or the shortcut Shift N, because those dots, they might look like design elements and you might not want to see those. So definitely a massive improvement here to the commenting experience. Again, we call these things annotations, and you can learn more about these in our documentation. These are, and I'm going to mention this at the end, again, these are coming to the Mac app. So you're not going to have to leave the Mac app to go to the web app in order to engage with the commenting experience. So that's huge. That's something I think we've all been waiting for a very long time, whether you're a designer trying to point out aspects of a design, or collaborating with other designers, or just collecting the feedback of non-designers without having to leave the design tool. I know we've all sort of leaned on commenting experiences as sort of a to-do list for ourselves, right? When that feedback rolls in and those comments are actionable items. So now we'll finally have those action items directly within the Mac app coming soon, and we'll be able to start hammering through those without leaving the Mac app. Super excited about that. All right, so stepping away from these annotations for a moment, we've also got sort of a revamped prototyping experience. We have a completely revamped prototype player, which is something that I want to point out before I leave the web app here. When you go into the prototype player, it might not look like much is different, but this has been completely rebuilt to now support not just flat images, but layered, layered layers with alpha. So this unlocks the possibility of overlays, which is another new feature of the Mac app that we reviewed last time around. You can see if I click on this little drop-down menu, there is an overlay that's appearing on this existing screen. It's not going to another screen, which is how our prototype player used to work. We could only go from one screen to another, sort of like this. But now we can add overlays on top of existing screens, and that is some really foundationally new stuff that's going on in the engine that's going to allow us to do more with prototyping in the future. And again, it's kind of a big deal that we've pulled this off on the web as well as the Mac app and our new mobile app. So our new mobile app, web app, and Mac app are all using this new prototyping engine that sets the stage for new improvements in the future. But for now, overlays are really the new feature, the new thing that we can engage with as users to increase the fidelity of our prototypes. So we're going to look at that real quick. That's going to be a recap from our previous sketch session where we really focused on those overlays. But I do want to leave plenty of time to talk about what's changed with symbols and symbol overrides. That's the bulk of what's really new since our previous sketch session. But before we do that, I just want to point out something relatively new, just in case you missed it. If I go to the components view on the web and I go to color variables, these color variables are a relatively new feature, especially if you've been using Sketch for more than 5 years. They're a relatively new feature of the Mac app that allow you to save colors and keep colors in sync throughout your document. And now through the web, as part of our developer handoff experience, you can export those as color tokens. Color tokens essentially allow you to spit out some documentation that developers can take and run with. And the reason I say documentation and not code, it is technically code. You can export JSON code or you can export CSS code, and it is ready to rock and roll. But the JSON code especially is written in a way that's meant to be taken by developers and parsed and transformed into whatever format they need, right? So the idea is we're exporting the names of the tokens and the values of the tokens, so that our engineers can do what they need to do with them, whether they're building a web app or an Android app or an iOS app. They can take these and transform them. There's a little note down here at the bottom that says JSON format is compatible with Amazon Style Dictionary. There is a tool built into Amazon Style Dictionary that developers can use to take these tokens and transform them into whatever format they need. So we're not trying to be too prescriptive over the formats. We're leaving that in the hands of your developers. All you need to do is either download this JSON file, copy and paste these tokens, or you can even enable a link that will allow them to download the tokens directly from a URL, which is pretty awesome. And this little feature here is nice too. If you enable these just for the latest star, that's short for enable for the latest starred version of your document. Starring a version of your document essentially marks it as an important milestone within the document. So by enabling this, the developers can continue to engineer based on the latest starred version while you continue to explore and make changes beyond that version. Essentially, you can continue editing your document without affecting the variables or the tokens that the engineers are working with from this URL. So that's a really cool little feature there. Awesome. All right, I think we can step away from the web app for the time being and head over to the Mac app. I'm going to give you a quick recap of overlays. Just go over a little trick that you can accomplish with overlays. And actually, I've got a couple of tricks for you. And then we'll head over to those override improvements in another document. So just to point out what an overlay is, in case some of you have missed it. First, let's do that poll, because I don't know how many of you are already familiar with overlays, how many of you have heard of them but haven't quite learned how they work yet. So I'm going to launch one more poll here. This is going to be our last one. I promise I'll stop bugging you with these polls. I would love to know how many folks are familiar with overlays and to what degree. Okay, some of you know them well. About a quarter of you know them well. Almost half of you don't know how they work, but you're familiar with the concept. And a third of you are not familiar with them at all. So that's perfect. We've got more than 2/3 of folks who will benefit from me giving this demo as if this is brand new stuff to you. I'm going to end this poll, get that out of your way. And now I'll create an overlay. So the way overlays work, essentially an artboard can either behave as a screen, right? Which these artboards would behave as a screen. They're the size of a device viewport. They're the size of an iPhone 14. But this little guy over here, this artboard is clearly smaller, right? And this artboard is meant to be overlaid on top of an existing artboard. It's the search modal. So if and when we click on a search button to launch the search modal, we don't want to have to duplicate that entire screen and create a version of it with the search modal on top, and then duplicate it again and create another version that has the keyboard on top and the search modal, right? You just end up with sort of this exponential duplication of screens. So an overlay allows us to just augment an existing screen or 100 existing screens with something that gets slapped on top of it. So the way we do that, again, an artboard can behave as a screen or it can behave as an overlay. And that's a distinction that we make on the prototyping tab. So I'm heading to the prototype tab and I'm going to switch from screen to overlay. So that's step one. The cool thing about overlays is you can set all of the settings for the overlay on the overlay itself, which allows you to link to this overlay without having to set the settings again and again and again and again. So I might say, I want this overlay to appear anchored to the top of the screen, right? And I want a little bit of an offset. I don't want it to be at the very top. Let's say I want it to be 40 pixels from the top. There we go. And I can even add a fill color. I could say, let's wash out the background a bit, maybe an 80% white overlay. And let's even apply a background blur. Let's do like a little 15 pixel radius background blur. You'll notice that as I'm doing this, you can't see anything happening. And that's because there isn't an instance of this for us to preview. In order to preview it, we would have to actually create a link to this overlay. But what's cool is we can fiddle with these settings as we create a link to the overlay, and then we could say, you know what, I want every overlay to behave like this. Let's push those settings to the main overlay itself. So let's look at that. I want the search button on this screen to link to our overlay, our little search modal. So with this selected in the prototype tab, I have a plus icon that'll allow me to create an interaction, and I'll drag that interaction over here. And because I'm linking to an overlay, it automatically goes into this overlay mode, right? And it gives me these overlay settings where I can now visually examine the position of this overlay and the animation. In fact, I'm going to have this do a little slide up. And as far as the position is concerned, I think I'm satisfied. If I want to align the baseline and be very, very specific about how this overlay aligns with the text that's underneath it, I can scoot this down just a little bit. You can actually click and drag and move this wherever you want, and the settings will update in the inspector. So that ends up being 45 pixels, which would have been guesswork if I didn't do it here. And now that I've done this, again, there's this little tiny icon over here where I can push these settings to the overlay so that any screen that links to it will use these exact same settings. And now that I've done that, I can preview it and I can see what this looks like. So I'm going to get this artboard selected, open up our preview window here. And in the preview window, I'll trigger the overlay. And there we have it. There's that white background with the blur. It's kind of hard to see. I was a little heavy-handed with the settings there. It's mostly washed out. But now I've got the overlay. I just need to link up this X to be a close button, which is the same as linking to a previous artboard. So for those of you who are familiar with how to link to a previous artboard, if you create a new interaction, there's this little tiny back button that appears next to the artboard that you're linking from. And by linking to that, you can see that the target here is now set to close overlay. Basically, if it's not an overlay, it links to previous artboard. And if it is an overlay, it automatically switches to close overlay. They really mean the same thing. So now if I preview this again, I can click on that and I can dismiss it. Pretty awesome. And you can also stack overlays on top of one another. So if I want this keyboard to come up, rather than baking it into the search modal or creating another version of the search modal, I could just link the text field here to the keyboard. And you'll notice the keyboard isn't even an artboard. It's actually just a symbol that's sitting here on the canvas. And because it's not an artboard, if I try to link to it, it will automatically turn it into an artboard and switch the mode of that artboard to overlay. So that's an even quicker and easier way to create an overlay. And in this case, naturally, I'd want to pin it to the bottom because that's where the keyboard comes up from. And because I'm editing a specific interaction, I'll push these settings to the overlay itself. And now we should be all good. The one thing that you may want to fiddle with when you start to stack overlays on top of one another is how you handle the interactions that are outside of that overlay. Because if you think of an overlay as sort of a piece of glass that covers everything that's underneath it, then the question is that glass going to block us from clicking on other things, right? Is that opaque in terms of functionality, even though it might be transparent in terms of visibility? So let's just take a look at how this is working right now. I'm going to go to preview. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to click on this. And there we go. We have our stacked overlays. Let me try to click the close button. You'll notice the close button isn't working. And that's because there's this invisible piece of glass that came with the keyboard overlay that's covering the screen and blocking that. So going back to our keyboard overlay, you'll notice in the settings it says outside interaction, none. we want to change that. We want to say, actually, I think when we click outside of the keyboard, it should close the keyboard. So I'm going to set that to close overlay. And we could also do the same for the search modal. We could say if we tap outside the search modal, let's have it close the search modal itself. So now we should be rocking and rolling. If I go to preview, we can open this. We can open this. If I click on the keyboard remains. If I click away from it, it dismisses it. And I can close this as well. So pretty cool. That is the gist of overlays. I will point out one last thing that I think is a really cool trick, and then I'll quickly move on in the interest of time. I've got a couple of icons here, and these icons have two different states. In fact, if I go to my symbols page, you can see that I have an off state and an on state, and I want to click on the off state to have it change to the off state. And while we don't yet have a way of swapping one icon for another, using overlays, I could slap the on state right on top of the off state, because you can make an overlay appear relative to the layer that triggers it, rather than making it relative to the entire viewport of the screen. So if I go in here, and I'm going to do this to the symbol itself, the symbol source itself, so that way wherever I use these icons, this overlay will come with it. I'm going to link the entire bounding box here over to this as an overlay. By just linking it, this isn't an overlay yet. So it's very important. If something is already an artboard or already a symbol, we've got to switch that mode to overlay. So that's looking good. Here's where the magic happens. Align relative to. Rather than aligning relative to the screen, I'm going to align it relative to the layer. And then we get this little widget here that says, or allows us to dictate how that alignment is going to happen. If the top of the overlay is going to align with the top of the layer triggering it, if the middle of the overlay is going to align with the middle of the layer that triggers it. And that's the one that I want. I want the middle of this overlay to align with the middle of the layer that's triggering it. So that should look good. But let's go look at the interaction itself. You can see here in the preview that it is looking good, but I don't want the animation. I want it to appear instantly. And I also want to be able to click the overlay and have it dismiss, right? So I can turn the heart off. So I'm going to create another interaction, and I'm going to have that target to close overlay, right? So now I have a way of opening it and closing it. I'm not going to bother with the bookmark icon because that's going to be the same process all over again. But coming back here and previewing it, we should be all good. There we have it, right? So without having to create alternate versions of this screen, because I would have to create heart off, bookmark off, heart on, bookmark off, heart on, bookmark on. I'd have to create 4 separate versions of the screen normally to create all the possibilities. But by using overlays, I can do all of this on a single screen, which is pretty awesome. It's sort of a creative, hacky workaround use for overlays, but our engineering team is exploring the possibility of swapping these things instead of stacking them one on top of the other, which would unlock a lot of new possibilities. So that is pretty awesome. Okay, so I've spent a lot of time on overlays, but I think it was worth it. Now let's talk about the improvements we've made to overrides. This is some big stuff. If you use symbols an awful lot, which you probably do, especially if you're designing things that are meant to be scaled and you have elements that are being reused on many screens, you might end up with something like this, where you have symbols with symbols inside of them, with more symbols inside of them. And selecting the correct layer in order to override it has been a little bit of a challenge in the past. We've made a small trade that I think is very, very worth it, where now, instead of double clicking bringing you to the symbol source, double clicking now lets you navigate the symbol instance itself. So let's play with this one. I'm going to zoom in here. So if I double click on this large component instance, it will actually dive in and select the individual instances that are within it, which allow me to head to the inspector and deal with overrides that apply only to the selected area. So you're able to narrow the scope of what it is that you're trying to override all the way down to the individual layers that you want to override. And you're able to do this visually rather than having to deal with an inspector that grows very, very long with overrides. And you can also use the same keyboard navigation that you use to navigate groups. I can press the escape key to go up a level. I can press the return key to go down a level. I can use the tab key to jump from layer to layer. So it's now so much easier to select the layer that you're trying to override. And when you do select a layer, you'll find that there are more overrides here than there used to be. You'll also find that there are fewer overrides than there used to be. But I'm gonna explain that right now. Color overrides are brand new. That's something that was not there before and has been a highly requested, even demanded feature. So I'm going to go up to something more colorful here. I'm going to select this main symbol, this sort of parent symbol, and you can see here that there are multiple colors that are going on within this this main symbol that are within the children, really, because this is a symbol with a symbol inside of it with more little tiny symbols inside of it. So at the parent level, I'm able to see that white is being used within this symbol. And the fact that white is being used on a bunch of different layers could make the list of overrides get very long. So now that we have the ability to select a specific layer that we want to override, if we don't do that, if we make a selection that has multiple layers with matching colors or matching styles or even matching images, the inspector combines them into one so that we can make a global change from this level without having to dive in and select individual layers. So again, if I want these to be black instead of white, I could just say, you know what? I want black or I want white to become black. And every layer within my selection, the scope of my selection that contains white, whether it's a white fill, a white piece of text, white border, or even a white shadow, it's going to override all of that. If I do want to make an exception, at first glance, you might say, okay, something seems wrong here because I don't always want to make that change at a global level. You can still click in. You can click through to a specific layer, and I could say, budget remaining. I want to make an exception there. I want that to be white. All you have to do is select it, right? And now whatever changes I make here on the inspector are going to apply only to that layer. The other thing you may notice now that I have a text layer selected, a specific text layer that's within a symbol instance, we can now override the style of text. So I don't need to create a separate symbol source anymore if I want a version of this that has a slightly emphasized black title here. If I want it to be underlined, if I want it to be, perhaps white, re-invert this. Doesn't necessarily look great with the other black text, but you get the idea. I'm able to make an exception. I'm able to make a drastic exception to text in a way that previously was not possible. We would have to create another symbol source that represents this version, or we'd have to create a unique text style, save it as a text style, and then swap one text style for the other. So again, it would create extra work for us previously, and now it's just sort of built in the way you'd expect right there on the inspector. So pretty awesome stuff. Same goes for alignment. So you'll no longer need to create a left aligned version of a text style and a middle aligned version of that same text style and a right aligned version of that same text style, and then create a black version and then create a white version and then create, a color that matches your emphasis or brand color. You can accomplish all of that via overrides, and in combination with color variables, this can be very, very powerful. So really awesome stuff here. Very, very welcome additions. And again, the same goes for textiles. So in terms of them being combined on the inspector. So with this main symbol selected, this parent symbol that has children within it, if I go down here to textiles, it shows headings H3, it's not showing every single layer that has an H3. It's showing that there are layers within the scope of my selection that are H3, and it's combining those into one item. Because if I want to change one of them, I probably want to change all of them, right? And again, if that's not the case, then I can go in and I can select individual layers and make exceptions there. So it's totally up to me in how I want to handle that. Awesome. So I think we're looking good here on overrides. I will point out that now, because we have these additional overrides, we have color overrides, etc. There's a lot more freedom that's unlocked by this. You're now able to make more exceptions, right, to symbols that are placed throughout your document. That being said, more governance needs to come with that. So I'm going to press Command Return, which is our new shortcut to go to the symbol source. And you'll notice here under Manage Overrides on the inspector, you can now disable font size. You can disable text color. You can disable the individual colors of different properties. I could say, the border color, I don't want to be able to change that. Border color of this, border color of that, I don't want that to be changed. But all the other stuff is fair game, right? So we've included all these things at a level of granularity that gives you a lot of control over how your symbols can be used by the folks that are consuming them. Because perhaps you're setting up the symbols and someone else is using them, right? Using instances of them in their designs, perhaps through shared libraries. So it's very important that we allow you to govern these things, because the beauty of symbols is being able to iterate in a way that's consistent at scale without being a lot of extra work. And consistency is sort of, in a way, the antithesis of freedom, right? So it's kind of hard to strike a balance between consistency and keeping things on rails, as well as the freedom and flexibility to deviate, right? So here we've kind of given you the best of both worlds, so you can govern those things. Cool. Okay, I think that just about does it for what's new with overrides here. Let me show you something really exciting that falls into the what's next category. We now, you may have seen this on Twitter, we have created a Figma to Sketch converter, and this is coming soon to Sketch itself. But right now, it is an open source GitHub project, and perhaps Denisa can drop a link in the chat. You could also find us on Twitter, where we posted that link. I personally have posted that link as well. And using this tool, you can take a .fig file, which is exportable from Figma. If you're not familiar with Figma, you can open a Figma file, go to File, choose export as .fig or save as .fig, and you get an actual file here. This file can't be opened and edited directly in Figma. If you want to work offline, you actually have to import it back into Figma. So it really doesn't solve anything from an offline perspective. But now with our converter, you could convert it into a sketch file, and you could edit that sketch file while you're offline. Or you can take that sketch file and upload it to your workspace and make it part of your online workflow. But the way this works, there is an app version of this that you can download for your appropriate hardware, whether you're on an Intel-based Mac or an M1 based Mac. You'll download the appropriate version of this from GitHub. And if you're like me and you're a designer and not an engineer, anything involving the terminal might be a little bit freaky, right? But this, as sort of a proof of concept or a utility, is a command line tool. So I'm going to show you how it works, because it's really easy once you know it, although it's not intuitive at all if you're a designer and not an engineer. So basically what you want to do, and there are probably a number of ways to do this, but I'm going to show you the Joseph way of doing it that I think is the easy way. Gather your .fig file and the script or plugin or converter, whatever you want to call it, into a folder. Right, put them together side by side in a folder, and then open that folder in terminal, right? It helps if you add the terminal application that's built into every Mac on your dock, because then you can just drag the folder itself onto terminal, right? That opens the folder in terminal. This terminal window now talks to this folder. So what I want to tell terminal is to run the script, to run it on this .fig file, and to generate a sketch file by a particular name. So all we do is // and then fig to sketch, because that is the name of the program that we're running. Then we put a space, and then we type the name of our .fig file, so material.fig. Then we put another space, and we type the name of what we want our sketch file to be called. So I'm going to name it material.sketch. Perfect. So // the name of the script, space, name of the Figma file, space, name of the desired sketch file, right? And then I hit return, and it's going to run the application. And when it's done, we have material.sketch, because that is the name that I typed into terminal. And we're all done. It's that easy. And again, this is going to be built into Sketch, so you're not going to have to worry about this command line thing for very long. But if you want to engage with this immediately, this is how you can go about it. And again, it is very easy once you know what to type into the terminal there. So I'm going to open up this sketch file, which didn't even exist a moment ago. And you can see here that I now have access to this awesome Figma community file that was created in Figma and not created in Sketch. And here we have everything. It's all layered up. It's a really, really beautiful thing. You might run into some issues with like font substitutions and things like that require some minor cleanup, but we're also continuing to iterate on the algorithm, you could call it, that facilitates the conversion here. So it's already improved drastically since version 1. Last I checked, we were on version 3, and it's a whole heck of a lot better than version 1 was. So you can count on this getting better and better. Pretty awesome stuff. Cool. So now there are a couple of other things, small things that I can hint at that are coming in the future. Let me head back to my little slide deck here, and we can talk about what's next. So the Figma importer, again, Figma importer is currently available on GitHub. It is open source. You can actually contribute to the project if you find an opportunity to improve the code itself. You can pass it on to the engineers that are on your team and have them contribute to the code if they're savvy to it and want to be of assistance to us. We would love the help. And again, it's going to be coming to Sketch as an importer. So right now it's a converter, it's a standalone converter, but it will eventually be a .fig importer for Sketch itself. So hopefully a easy little drag and drop or just from a file menu, and boom, it'll be a done deal. The other thing, we've got some new document templates that are on the way. So we've got an in-house content design team, and they are hard at work designing new templates and mockups that are going to be built into Sketch. So that's going to be a really great new thing to help combat the blank page syndrome, right? We've already got the templates feature built into the Mac app. You'll find templates when you launch the workspaces window here. There's this templates button over here on the side where we've got a few to play with. We're going to double down on that. We're going to keep adding to that and create a little ecosystem. We've got a long list of things that we could create. It's prioritizing that list and getting these things out the door. That's the hard part. But you can look forward to more and more awesome new templates and mockups and things like that coming soon. Then we have annotations in the Mac app. Again, the annotations that we saw in the web app, those are live. If you go to the web app, you can already add those annotations. But coming soon is an annotations button or a comments button that's going to exist on the toolbar itself, where you can just slap these directly onto the design canvas or directly onto artboards and read the comments that are being left by others. You know, you might have an engineer who's on a PC halfway across the world adding those comments on the web, and they're going to appear directly within the design tool. So you can take that feedback and make it actionable without ever opening a web browser. Pretty awesome to not have to switch context like that. Then I think this is the last little thing I have to share. per document libraries. You may have found in the past that you enable Sketch libraries at the app level. You go into the preferences for Sketch and you enable or disable libraries. But it's very possible that you're not getting much use out of a library on a day-to-day basis, though a document relies on it, or a few documents rely on it, right? So in the future, you'll be able to add a library at the document level so that when you're working with that document, those libraries become enabled, right? Because you're going to need them when you're working with the document that uses components from that document. But once you close it, you might not want those to appear anymore in the quick insert window or anywhere within the application. So this is going to be a really nice way to sort of coalesce relevant libraries into a bundle where they matter, and then get them out of your way, get them out of your site when they're not needed. So pretty awesome stuff. I'm excited about that coming soon.
This was it was really nice having you, everyone. We'll get this recording also posted on our YouTube channel if anyone needs to rewatch it. And great having you. See you for the next one.
Thank you all. See you soon.
Thanks, guys.